Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about improper access. We've mentioned some of this before. This is not going to be a huge surprise. But the idea is that if someone can do something they're not supposed to do, right? They're acting outside of whatever their authorization is. Um, and so what we're sort of looking at here, here's an example of this, is that if you end up, doing something where you can hide and show something based on some scope value, and something I should also mention, if you haven't done it, if you end up, see if there's a quick way for me to even show this. If you end up in your, if you're using Chrome and using the developer tools, one thing you could do is you could actually select an element and you could find the scope for that element. And if you could do that, nothing prevents you from modifying the scope of that element. So in this example, you could just end up setting yourself up to be an admin locally, and you'd be able to see this link. Here's an example of sort of how this ends up, getting done. You could do Angular element, and you could actually end up grabbing the scope, and you could modify it. So you could do it right in the console. Again, when we think about the UI, I think really what you have to think about is the fact that, this is just, you're really putting this in there for usability purposes. So in other words, you don't want to show a link that the user can't do anything with. So you don't want to have, basically say, hey, look, click this link to edit something. And then when they click edit, you have an error message that pops up that says, sorry, you can't edit, you're an admin. You want to hide that link from them. But again, it's really just a UX concern that you're hiding the link for them. You really want to have some security so that if you do have routes that are exposed on the back end, you really want to be able to protect it so they can't, access those routes. So what we're really talking about here is protecting what we really are calling your API of your application. Again, this could be for GET requests. Can users end up getting information about other users that they shouldn't get? But for the most part, at a bare minimum, we want to make sure that users that can't edit and create and delete are not given the ability to do that. So, one way that you can end up doing this, or a pretty common way to do this, is with, middleware. So, here's an example of, overprotection, right? I mean, if we ended up putting this middleware in here, this wouldn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense, because everyone that went to use your site would be getting a 403 error, right? This wouldn't make a lot of sense. So, I mean, if someone said, hey, look, I want to hire you, I want to make sure that no one could do anything bad in my application, and this was your solution for them, this is the equivalent of saying, my house is safe because it doesn't have a door, right? It's not going to be a very useful house. I mean, in other words, you want to make your, you want to protect things, but you don't want to overprotect them. So again, a good way to do this, if you sort of think about this, we did this a little bit when we ended up looking at creating a restricted page. And the whole idea is to basically lock down your routes as best as possible. And there are some rules in your application. I don't think, if you really wanted to overdo things, I mean, there's quite a bit of work there. But if you think about this application, users, the way that logic works is you can sort of think these things out. A user can, create a story, but the user has to be logged in, right? And you should only be able to create a story that's associated with a user if, in fact, you are that user. But then there's other end cases that say, well, if you're an admin, you should be able to do it as well. So again, you could sort of go a little bit crazy for this, but at a bare minimum, I think you want to have some control over the application, where a user who's never even been logged into the application is not going to be able to, modify these things and delete these things. And so that's kind of the next step that you'll be looking at. If you want to, you could start from the second folder, and that'll show you the solutions that you might have come to from the first part, which was going in and adding some protections from the secret values that you had. But again, this is just another thing to look at. If I was going in to look at an application, right off the bat, things that will start jumping out at you. Now hey, look, if you end up going and you start seeing like funny values in a Git repo and you see some secret keys there, that should jump out at you. Say, wait a minute, that can be a bit of a mistake. Also, if you start to look at routes and you see there are routes that are doing destructive things, at a bare minimum, being able to delete things, that sort of thing, you should look at it and say, shouldn't there be some kind of middleware on this to offer some kind of protection in this application? I mean, if you don't see that, then basically what you're seeing is that you could go and, set up Postman or make curl requests to this application and wreak havoc on this application. So again, these are two things at this point that should start jumping out at you.